Hi, my name is Anna and I read 25 books this summer. Now, if you've watched any of my vlogs, I've mentioned them kind of sporadically throughout in a couple of my thoughts, but I thought it might be fun just to sit down, talk about those books that I've read, and have it all in one place where I can let you know which books are worth your time, which ones, in my opinion, might not be. I understand that my opinion is different than other people's, and that whatever I say cannot speak totally for you. If you still want to give a book a chance, please give a book a chance. But if you like this kind of video, let me know. I would love to do more of them. I didn't read this year starting until May. So these books that I'm about to mention are the books that I've read this entire year. That just also happens to be this entire summer. It was after I graduated undergrad that I kind of got back into reading and have fell quickly back in love with it. I have some of the books here physically with me, and then some of the books I got from the library, and so they have been long returned by now. Like, I got my tea here with us too, for the vibes. But yeah, without much further ado, let's get into it. The first book that I read back in the beginning of May was All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. Now, as I mentioned, I was not reading earlier before. Like, this was my first book that I sat down and read in probably like 6 or 7 months, and this was a great one to get back into the habit with. This book mainly follows two characters. One is Marie-Laure, who is 12 years old, and she lives in Paris with her father, who is like the keeper of the keys at the National History Museum in Paris, but their lives are obviously pretty upended whenever the Nazis come and occupy Paris, and so she must flee with her father, and they go to a small little oceanside sea town called St. Malo to live with her great uncle. Now, Marie-Laure is such an easy character to fall in love with. Like I mentioned, she starts at 12 years old. She is blind. She makes the most of just kind of the world around her. It's like she sees the beauty of the world around her, but she also just interacts with people well and is such a lovable character. And then the other character is a little boy named Werner. And Werner lives in a small mining town as an orphan with his sister in like kind of a group home setting, it seems like, for orphans. And he kind of assumes that he will grow up and become a coal miner just like everyone else in the town does, unless something dramatic happens to him. And oh boy, does it. He discovers a radio one night and finds that he just loves working with things, finding out how things work, specifically radios. And he is actually recruited. He is able to go to an elite school. It's a school for Hitler Youth, but that changes his trajectory for life. So he goes to this school, he gets recruited to join the Nazis, and throughout most of the book their lives are very separate. It's kind of dual point of view, but of two separate stories, and you're kind of waiting and waiting. It's sort of like a slow burn to find out how they're going to come together, but it really is just two kids who are experiencing a very extreme life. And as you see so much happen to them and just get to follow along in their life, you really become attached to them as they are growing older, as they are maturing. Like I said, this was the first book I read, and it was such a good one to get back into reading with. I think if I started with any other book, maybe I wouldn't have kept reading throughout the summer, but All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, definitely worth your time. The next book that I read was And the Mountains Echoed by Khaled Hosseini. Now, he is the same author that wrote The Kite Runner and A Thousand Splendid Suns, and I will say, like, content matter wise, this is his easiest book. Both The Kite Runner and A Thousand Splendid Suns are kind of hard books to get through just with the things that happen in them, very difficult, but this one, it is different. It takes place in 1950s Afghanistan. It starts in a very small village with not a lot of wealth around, and we get to see the family of a 10-year-old boy named Abdullah and his little sister Pari, and they are so close as brother and sister. They really watch out for each other. They're just connected beyond belief until a series of situations happens where their family is separated and their stories split. Now, something special about this book is that it's not written necessarily chronologically. It's written from each character's point of view, and you get their entire point of view at a time. So you get to see the story unfold in a very unique way. Some of the characters, it'll start the chapter and you're really like, you have no idea how they're connected to the story that you already know or to the family that we're following. And then you just, learn as you go along the way. You get to learn different people's thoughts and motivations, and it really is a unique way of writing. I've never read another book that is quite like that, and I really did appreciate that writing. I think he pulled it off well. And The Mountains Echoed is another book that is definitely worth your time. Now, next comes Bring Me Back by B.A. Paris. In this book, Finn and Layla were young and in love until one night at a gas station, Finn goes inside, leaving Layla by herself in the dark in her car, and when he comes back, she has disappeared. And that is the story that he tells the police, and he me sticking to it, but is that the full story? You kind of find out in the book more that has happened around that situation, but the book itself actually starts and takes place fully 12 years later after Layla disappeared, where Finn has finally gotten over her and has started a new life with a new woman who is actually Ellen, Layla's older sister. The story really gets going whenever Finn hears that someone has reported a recent Layla sighting, and so he starts kind of investigating. Some new things come to light. It's a little dark and suspenseful at times. There's a couple twists, but in my opinion, this book really disappointed me. The writing itself did not impress me necessarily. It kind of seems like the people who we were hearing from, the different points of views, didn't really have complex thought, and lots of times I didn't quite feel convinced by the plot. It was like the author would say that something was happening and I just like didn't feel convinced. I didn't feel that it was happening too. Personally, I think I came up with some better twists than the author actually enacted. It's okay for a quick read, and I guess this should come with a caveat that like dark and twisty isn't usually my cup of tea. I usually kind of stray away from them because I'm a weenie and don't like scary things, but this one fell flat even for me who doesn't typically like that. Like I said, it's okay for a quick read. It's not super long, but I don't think Bring Me Back is worth your time. Now the next book I read, I'm sure you've heard about. It's been very popular, but Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. In this book, Alex Claremont Diaz is the first son, the son of the woman president, Mrs. President of the United States, and then our other main character is Prince Henry of Wales, I believe. So like British royal family, and it's enemies to lovers. It is a quick-paced read. It kind of felt almost like I was watching a like TV show. Like there was witty banter, things kept happening, and so I really stayed hooked. I stayed drawn in the entire time, and it's written in a way that you really fall in love with the characters. They're very relatable, they're funny, they're honestly just really lovable. It's not necessarily a complex book, but it's also not a shallow book. I feel like it's just that good middle of the road, doesn't make you think too hard, it makes you think a little. You don't get like sobbing invested, but like you really do care about what's happening. So Red, White, and Royal Blue, worth your time. The fifth book I read was Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. Now in Such a Fun Age, while watching the toddler that she nannies, Amira Tucker is confronted in a grocery store by a woman who accuses her of kidnapping the 2-year-old named Briar. Amira is black and Briar is white, and somebody nearby in the grocery store takes a video of the whole infraction accusation that happens. Upon learning what happened, Alex Chamberlain, who is Briar's mom, and she's like girl boss, you know, paved her way, made her own company. She aggressively wants to make things better, whereas Amira would much rather kind of just leave it in the past and move on. Now, something I think is important to mention is that this book, unlike some of the books that I will mention coming up later in the video, this book is written by a woman of color and it's about racial issues. And so it is not a white author, which I think is important when reading books that talk about racial issues, but it talks about racial issues in ways that really made me think while still being a good story where you like the characters. It's almost a spectrum of people who do too little and people who overdo it and do too much, and kind of just seeing the different interactions and the different motivations and the different good intentions that really just are not good that people have. It wasn't a 5-star read from me by any means, just with sometimes the story kind of dragged, sometimes I didn't really find myself just like dying to pick it back up again, but I definitely do think that Such a Fun Age is worth your time. So the next book that I read was Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, and in this book, Kathy goes to Hailsham, which is like an English boarding school that teaches nothing of the outside world. We watch Kathy grow up in her boarding school, we watch Kathy leave the boarding school for this like 2 years that they have after boarding school before they have to do the job they're destined for, and we watch her question her like true purpose of being at Hailsham and like what Hailsham's true purpose is. This book I gave 1 star to. It really was not good in my mind. I think what it was nothing really happened until maybe like 30 pages from the end, so it was really slow. I really had to power through it. Also the concept, like I don't want to give it away, I don't want to give any spoilers, but like her true purpose, like all that stuff was very predictable, didn't really make you think at all. I think it was supposed to make you think some. Honestly, at lots of points in the books I just didn't like the characters, and not in like a purposeful way from the author. You know, sometimes authors can do that on purpose, and I just feel like, oh, my mom's calling. Hello.
Hey there, what are you doing?
Just chilling. What about you? Always answer your mom's phone calls no matter what you're doing. But I don't remember what I was talking about. Never Let Me Go. Not worth your time. I don't know if I said that yet. I didn't like it. It wasn't worth my time, to be quite honest with you. Next on the list was The Displaced, Refugee Writers on Refugee Lives. And this book is not a novel. It is a series of essays, and it was really good. It's a series of essays written by various refugees from various regions of the world with various life stories and reasons they left, and just kind of having to discover how each person seeks and finds refuge away from their home as needed. And it's a quick read. I think it was like 180 pages, but I definitely think that this book is worth everyone's time, especially given just, you know, the state of the world as it always is. It's very important to have empathy for people who are needing to seek refuge away from their own home. Something that was interesting, I think it was just mentioned in one essay, it wasn't like the overarching theme of the book or anything, but it talked about being an economic refugee, which I had just never heard of before or thought of before. I think with refugees you think of, you know, war, maybe just war, but it talked about, you know, how sometimes the financial situations in someone's home country is enough that they really are having to flee and seek refuge somewhere else. Just a really good book. It really sparks empathy, I think, in anyone who reads it, and I think if there's one thing our world needs, it's a lot more empathy right now. So The Displaced, definitely worth your time. These next two books are actually juvenile fiction books. So I read them both. One I'd never read before, one I had read before and just wanted to read again. But the first one is The Maze Runner by James Dashner. In this book, Thomas wakes up in the lift and he can only remember his name. He is at the Glade, which is like this little grass encampment that's made up of boys, like adolescent boys from like 13 to 17, none of whom can remember their life before they showed up at the Glade, but who have just like created this society that they live in now. They don't necessarily know their purpose, why they're there, but what they do know is that there is a maze outside of the walls that changes every night, that has like scary things in it, and every so often, I think it's like once a month or so, a new boy shows up at the Glade, and so they just kind of are living, make do, whatever. And one day, a girl, the first girl ever, shows up in the lift at the Glade with a shocking message to the boys. This book I read because I've always heard about it. I know it's very popular. I think it's a series, it has more than one book, and I think in my head I had hyped it up to the level of like The Hunger Games, Divergent, even like Percy Jackson, like the books that I really loved, the series that I really loved as a juvenile. I think I was hoping for the same thing from The Maze Runner, and it just didn't give that to me. So I think it's the kind of book that if you read it when you were younger and you really like it, maybe don't read it again so you can keep that. You can keep the really liking it, because I don't know how much the like juvenile fiction aspect played into it, like if that was the reason that I didn't like it, but I have liked other juvenile fiction books that I read later in life too, so I don't know, it just kind of fell flat to me. I didn't really care about what was happening in the book. So if you've already read The Maze Runner, great. If you haven't, worth your time. The other juvenile fiction book was The Candy Shop War by Brandon Mull, and I remember I don't think I read this one when I was small. When I was like 10, I listened to it on audiobook in my little tape recorder in my room, my little cassette tape player. But in this book, friends Nate, Summer, Trevor, and Pigeon all befriend Belinda White, who is this mysterious woman who opens a new candy shop in town. They befriend her, they kind of become her ally, and she gives them candies that have magical side effects, things like anti-gravity, you can jump as high as you want, things like little electrical shock throwers, just fun little magical side effects to the candy. And really this book kind of turns into like learning that she's not the only magician in town. They have to find out who is good, who is evil. There's kind of some treasure hunting involved, and I remember really loving this book when I was little, and I do not love it anymore. I do not think it is worth your time. It was interesting, like it wasn't bad. Like I think this one is like kind of close to being worth your time, but didn't quite make the cut. There are things, and this was something that I kind of noticed throughout the book and then I read like reviews of later after I finished the book, but the author himself is just not politically correct in a lot of the ways that he writes. He really fulfills racial stereotypes in ways that definitely shouldn't be written for kids who would just kind of accept that maybe without questioning it. And the writing itself just isn't like beautiful and great, and the story itself, you know, you could live without it. So I'm gonna say The Candy Shop War is not worth your time. The 10th book that I read this summer is a little short story, kind of. We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And this book is basically exactly what you would guess by the title. It's like 67 7 pages, I think. So really a quick read, or a quick, like, it would almost be like listening to a podcast if you listen to the audiobook. Like, I think everyone should read this book, but it's just a definition of feminism for the 21st century. It's rooted in inclusion and awareness, and she talks about some of her own experiences being a Nigerian woman who has spent some time in America. And I just think it's important for anyone to read today, but especially anyone who would identify themselves as a feminist, just a quick little read to get some like explicit sentences and words and thoughts to have about why you are a feminist and what it means to be, you know, for empowering women. So we should all be feminists. Worth your time. The next book I read was Admission by Julie Buxbaum, and this book is about Chloe, who is a high school senior working to get into her dream college. And this is all in the back. This isn't a spoiler, but it's basically just a college admissions scandal. So her parents scam their way to get Chloe into her dream school. She doesn't, but kind of does know as it's happening, and there are a lot of similarities between this book and the story of, am I allowed to say names? Could I get in trouble for that? The story of the daughter of a famous actress who also once was a YouTube little star and then went off social media for a while after the admission scandal, and I think she's now back, if you know who I'm talking about. It's basically that story, but like in fiction novel form. Now, I think why this book fell flat for me is that I don't necessarily think that there needs to be more empathy for the people who were involved with the college admissions scandal. And it kind of seems like this book is like trying to give nuance to the side of the people who cheated their way into the system. And the book does not really mention much about the issues with that. It kind of just talks about like Chloe kind of learning to realize that she has privilege and more privilege than other people, but she has this little boy that she reads with who is very underprivileged, and so like he teaches her a lot, and like she didn't really question her parents when she thought sketchy things might be happening, and like it's a shallow book, and I don't think it teaches anything, or like what it does teach and who it shows to give empathy towards or like to understand, I don't necessarily think needs more understanding and empathy. You know what I mean? So in my opinion, Admission is not worth your time. I Will Always Write Back by Caitlin Alafarinka and Martin Ganda. In this book, it's just a good feel-good story. Spoiler alert, it's worth your time. I guess that's not a real spoiler. It's okay, you can listen to that. It's worth your time. But it is basically what all of us wished our little like 10-year-old pen pal dreams would become, where Caitlin and Martin both get assignments in school that they are to write a pen pal from somewhere else in the world. And so Caitlin chooses Zimbabwe, which is how she gets paired with Martin. And unlike the other kids in both of their classes, they continue writing to each other for years and kind of grow up with each other. They are able to help each other in various ways. They end up meeting. It really is just a good feel-good story. Like if you need a little break from like super serious things in the world and just kind of need to hear about two people who have grown up very differently and come together to become friends, like this is a good book for that. So I Will Always Write Back, worth your time. The 13th book is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, and this book I'm sure you've heard of. It has the TV series now. I haven't watched that, so I can't speak to that, but I did read the book, and this book takes place in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is like the perfect suburban town where everything is planned, everything is perfect, everything is ideal. And we have the Richardsons, which is a well-off family living comfortably with Mr. Richardson, Mrs. Richardson, and their 4 children. And they also have a rental property who they rent to 2 newcomers in the town. Mia is a kind of eclectic artist, single mom to Pearl, who is high school age. She befriends the Richardson kids, has different relationships with all 4 of them. And 2 main kind of storylines unfold throughout this book. And one of them, Mrs. Richardson, it kind of becomes suspicious of Mia and who's hanging around her kids. And so she does some deep digging into Mia's past and uncovers some secrets that Mia has just kind of carried with her throughout her life. And then another storyline is the McCulloughs, who are good friends of the Richardsons, adopt a Chinese baby girl who was left at a fire station. And Mia kind of uncovers some information related to that. And so it ends up in a big custody battle. And the whole book just kind of discusses what it means to be a mother, who deserves to be a mother, who is a mother, while also bringing in kind of like what it's like to hold the weight of past secrets. And it even talks some just about like the importance of art in life. And I do think that it was a beautiful story. It was was really entertaining to read as I read it, and then it's the kind of book that I have thought about a lot of times since I read it. It's another one that can really, I think, spark empathy in people for just people of various stories and people who make different choices, and I would say that Little Fires Everywhere is worth your time. My next book was Sitting Pretty by Rebecca Tossig, and this is a memoir and essays from Rebecca Tossig, who has an Instagram account called, I think it's just called Sitting Pretty, but she is a disability advocate. She herself is in a wheelchair and has been for the majority of her life, and she just paints a portrait of what it's like to have a body that looks and moves differently than other people's in this world. She teaches about how our world sees disability, how our world should see disability. She talks about how disability is a part of her identity, and she talks about the parts of her identity that hardly have anything to do with disability. She's funny, she's relatable, she's well-spoken, and this little memoir and essays, Sitting Pretty, is definitely worth your time. Honestly, just Rebecca is definitely worth your time, even if you just want to go follow the Instagram account. She's a good advocate. My next book was called No Drama Discipline by Daniel J. Siegel. And Siegel? I feel like there's no other way to say that last name, but that just makes me think of the bird. I didn't say it out loud until right now. This is a nonfiction book, and I think it's an important book for anyone who works with kids or will interact with kids. It talks about just gentle discipline. It teaches about child development and what to expect from children, how to interact with children, how to interact with children beneficially to where it like can actually engage with them, and overall, while it's not the most like riveting, groundbreaking, page-turning book in the world, I think it is important for anyone who works with children to know this mindset and to work on having this mindset while they interact with children. So that being said, I do think No Drama Discipline is worth your time, but it's kind of up to you to decide whether it's worth specifically your time, you know? But it's a good read and it's good knowledge to have. Oh, the next book I finished in one sitting. Granted, I was on a plane, so I didn't have like too much else to do, but The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. Jojo Moyes is the same author that wrote like Me Before You. Remember that one? She wrote that. But this book took me by the heart. Really held on to it. It takes place in Depression-era rural Kentucky, where 5 women power a pack horse library. It was when Eleanor Roosevelt had like a reading initiative, a literary initiative for the country, and so these 5 women have a library on horseback that they use to take books to the people of the town and even the rural people in the mountains around Kentucky. Now, one of our main characters is Alice, and she is from England, moved to Kentucky with her now husband, who was on vacation in England when they met, and Alice just really wanted to escape from the kind of stuffy, claustrophobic life that she was leading in England, and so she wanted to go to America and found herself in rural Kentucky, which was a little bit different than what she had pictured, as I'm sure you can imagine. So being just from such a different area, she doesn't quite fit in the town, and she becomes really great friends and like allies with Marjorie, who is a fierce woman who born and raised in the area. And this book, so much unfolds. It is so good, and I don't always love historical fiction. I think sometimes it's just a little boring to me. This book was not boring. This book, like I said, took me by the heart, held on to it, probably still has a little piece of it. It really just discusses like what it means to be a woman, especially in the 1930s. It's a lot of like breaking out of the bounds, challenging men's power over women, while just also being a story that you fall in love with. There's best friendship, there's kind of small town tea, there's romances, there's some heavy conflict, and this book is 100% worth your time. One of the best books that I have read, if you can't tell by how I'm talking about it. Okay, now the next book is really 4 books, and I just ask that you give them a chance. I kind of read these almost as like a guilty pleasure, but like I actually do enjoy reading them. But I read the first 4 books in the Pretty Little Liars series. So the series of books has like 4 big story arcs. No, maybe 3. I don't know, but it's 4 books per story arc. And so the first 4 books are like the first kind of group, the little bundle of the series. And so it's Pretty Little Liars, Flawless, Perfect, and Unbelievable are the first 4 books. And so if you don't know the story, like whether you read them when you were littler, I read these in middle school, so I just read them again. Whether you read them when you were younger or you watched the movies, basically in middle school, Allie ruled the school, and her 4 best friends, Aria, Hannah, Spencer, and Emily, did it with her, even though they all kind of had a little love-hate relationship with Allie, as all of us I feel like do with at least like one friend in middle school, where like you're really honored that they like you, but also like they're kind of mean to you, so what do you do with that? That was them in middle school until one night in 7th grade when Allie goes missing. And in the aftermath of Allie going missing, her family ups and leaves town, and the rest of the 4 girls kind of drift apart and start leading just very different lives as they finish up middle school, go to high school. And so the books themselves actually take place when the girls are in high school, I think 10th grade, I'm pretty sure, and they become united again when they start getting mysterious messages from someone who signs them A, and who knows secrets that only Allie knew. And so the girls come together again, and like I said, I obviously wouldn't have read all 4, and I'm planning on reading more. That book over there is actually the 5th one. If I didn't enjoy them, I wouldn't have read them. However, that must come with the fact that when going into reading them, you need to know that they are not good books. I have so much enjoyment reading the reviews of the books after I finish reading one of them, because people point out the funniest things, like the names that are in the book are really bad. There's a lot of metaphors and similes that are just really bad. There's a lot of privilege. There's a lot of deep topics that aren't always handled the best they should. And so I don't want to suggest this to you and be like, they're great books and I agree with everything that's in them, but can they be entertainment in the same way that trash TV can be entertainment? Yes, for sure. And so for that reason, I would say that they're worth your time. I do enjoy reading them, but it is a guilty pleasure. They're not always politically correct. There's a lot of plot holes just throughout, so know that as you go into it. But can they be really good? Yeah, they can. Okay, we're coming up on the end here, so you've stuck with me for a long time. The next book is Small Great Things by Jodi Picoult. And this book, well, I'll just tell you the kind of plot line first. So Ruth is a Black labor and delivery nurse who lives in Connecticut, has over 20 years of experience in her nursing job, and she gets reassigned off of a newborn's case because the family requests that no Black doctors or nurses work with their child. The hospital complies with that request, and then a couple days after that, Ruth is the only one left in the room with the baby when the baby goes into cardiac arrest. Now, based on what happens there, what happens in that room, afterwards Ruth faces some serious charges. And so the book itself is told from multiple points of view. It's told from Ruth's point of view. It's told from Kennedy, I believe her name is, who is Ruth's future lawyer's point of view. And it's told from the point of view of a guy whose name I can't remember and who I don't necessarily want to, but a white supremacist's point of view. And I will say, as I read this book, I thought it was a really good book. After I finished it, I gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed the book. I felt like it made me think. I felt very uncomfortable through a lot of it, just due to the subject matter and also due to the point of view of the white supremacist. I just did not like being in his head. I can't think of his name. I don't know. Like I said, I don't really care either. But I do want to say that after I read the book and was reading other people's reviews on it, this didn't occur to me, which kind of shows my privilege and the fact that it didn't have to occur to me. But it is a story written about race by a white woman. And so Jodi Picoult is a well-known author. She has lots of books. She has lots of good books. This book kind of resembles her other ones, just in the multi-point of view, covers hard topics type of thing. But a lot of the reviews were saying that Jodi should have let someone else tell this story, someone who could have told it from a better insight than Jodi could herself, because the story itself, the book itself, is Ruth's story, a Black woman, and it is not written by a Black woman. It is written as a white woman's take on being a woman of color. So that's just important to know entering the book if you do choose to read it. Like I said, I really enjoyed the book and I didn't have to think about those things as I read it, which is something that I have been reflecting on, as I pick up more books, just making sure I'm aware of, the discussion about it. It's really always important to read own voice reviews of books, because I can say what I want to about a book that's about race, but that does not really hold much weight at all, if any. And so that's just important to know when you enter into Small Great Things. But I do think that it was worth your time if you do choose to read it. I think it was a good story, and like I said, it makes you uncomfortable in ways that maybe you might not want to be, but that are important to be. So Small Great Things, I do think, is worth your time. Next, what is this? Number 22, Off the Record by Cameron Garrett. In this book, 17-year-old Josie is an aspiring writer, and she wins an essay contest, and the prize is that she gets to tour to different American cities with the cast with this new movie, and she gets to write a celebrity profile on this new up-and-coming actor. Along the route, as she is traveling with various actresses and just interns and such, she discovers that a lot of the young women have a secret that is kind of a hidden in plain sight secret about a very well-known movie director. And so in this book, Josie kind of has to decide now that I just got totally blind. There's a girl who's sitting out under my window and she turned her phone and so the sun twice. What was I saying? saying? Oh, Josie has to decide what she's gonna do with this knowledge now that she knows these girls' secrets, because she has to decide kind of like, is she going to tell their stories? Is she just going to be a bystander and let it stay hidden? This isn't a spoiler like I think you could assume, but it's essentially the Harvey Weinstein case, but just told from the point of view of 17-year-old Josie. Now, I do believe this is this author's second novel, and I think that, I'm trying to say, like, I didn't necessarily dislike it, but I think she tried to cover a lot of different topics in one book, whereas maybe picking like one or two would have made it a more effective book. For instance, we kind of touch on body positivity, we kind of touch on fat phobia, we kind of touch on like, a romance, we kind of touch on sexual assault. There's a lot of different topics that are put into this book that it's so many and such like a small kind of story that it's like not everything gets the time of day that it deserves, if that makes any kind of sense. So it's like, as reading the book, it was like, oh, this is awesome what it's saying about like body positivity and fat phobia, but then it only mentions it like 3 times throughout the book, and so then it's like I'm kind of left not necessarily even wanting more, but almost like confused of what I was like really supposed to get from the story itself. Like I don't know what the main theme was supposed to be. That being said, I don't think Off the Record is a book that is necessarily worth your time, and I feel bad saying that for this one because like Josie, the main character, like she's a lovable character. From what I know, like the author is a really great gal, like, but the book did not impress me. The next book I actually have here physically, one of my 4 that I have with me. It is Out of the Rain by V.C. Andrews. This book actually comes out on October 5th, 2021. It was sent to me to like do a review, like one of the Goodreads giveaways. And so what I didn't know necessarily before I got this book, V.C. Andrews is a well-known author, kind of infamous for how dark and twisty her books can be. And like the other books are dark and twisty in ways that I do not want to engage with. I do not think I will be reading another V.C. Andrews book. That being said, V.C. Andrews died, I forget when, quite a few years ago. And so this is actually Ghostwriter, that is like the corporation of V.C. Andrews now, like trademark name, Ghostwriter, that's like finishing some stories that she had already started or written. This one is not super dark and twisty, to be honest. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, I don't necessarily like dark and twisty. And from what I know the other books really are, this one is not. But that being said, I did not like this book. It is about Saffron, who is a 13-year-old, and she returns to the town that her father lives in, a father that abandoned her when she was much younger and sent her to live with her maternal grandmother, who she did not know, but she grew up with. Her grandmother died, and so she went back to be with her father because that is the only other person she knew, the only other kin she had still living. When she gets to town, she finds that her father has already made like a new family. He has a new wife, he has a new daughter, nearly the same age as her, and they have a baby. And the wife of the father, the new wife, is like a really well-known name, kind of runs the town, that family does. And so the father can't have people knowing that Saffron is his daughter. So he comes up with this whole web of lies about how he's really her uncle, and her mom who lived in California died and she walked in on her when she was dead, and all of this stuff, like this huge web of lies. And essentially the book is just Saffron having to decide if she is going to live in that lie or not. That is what happens for all the book. Not much more does. And so the writing itself, I do feel like it's good. Like it's like beautiful, like can make a picture in your head kind of like writing, like the words, but the actual plot and the characters I just didn't care for. And so in my opinion, Out of the Rain, V.C. Andrews, comes out October 5th. Not worth your time. Oh my goodness, we only have 2 more. So, 24, second to last, The Westing Game by Ellen Raskin. This book is honestly a classic. A bizarre chain of events leads to 16 people who are all possible heirs of Samuel Westing's like really big fortune. He was a really rich guy, but he really loved playing games, and so that's how he gets like these 16 players to all compete to win his like full estate or whatever the prize is. It's a good book. It's a mystery. You get to meet 16 characters, all with various personalities. It's a pretty short read. It's a juvenile fiction one, but honestly, I think it would have gone over my head if I read it when I was like 12. I had to reread some paragraphs like me now at my current reading level just to like make sense of them. It is pretty complex, but it is interesting, takes little twists and turns, and it just feels like you're playing a game as you read the book. So The Westing Game, I think, is definitely worth your time. Now the last book, we've made it to the end. The last book is is Malibu Rising by Taylor Reed Jenkins. Now this book you have for sure heard of if you are anywhere on TikTok, BookTube, honestly even just lifestyle vloggers, and personally I loved this book. It takes place like 1950s to like 1980s Malibu, creates a beautiful picture just like of the world, of the area, makes it one that you want to live in. It goes deep into the lives of each of the characters, multi-generational. You kind of fall in love with everyone, even the ones that you don't want to fall in love with. And I don't know how I can talk about this book to do it justice, so I want to suggest that you look up other reviews of this book to hear people who can talk about it more eloquently, because all I know is that I loved this book. It was really so good, and I was like upset when I finished it just due to the fact that I had finished it. So Malibu Rising, for sure worth your time. Now I know this video has gotten really long because my camera actually just cut me off to tell me maximum recording time has been reached. And so I don't think I need to do much of an outro, but if you are wanting to read any of these books, or if you have read any of these books, let me know in the comments what you thought of them. If you disagree with me, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to know why. But if you enjoyed this book, if you enjoyed this video at all, please subscribe to me to see more. And we'll be back to our regularly scheduled content that's not necessarily books coming up. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.